Hot Springs Village Inside Out is a closer look at the greatness of Hot Springs Village, Arkansas, and the surrounding areas. People, places, experiences. Hot Springs Village is one of the most beautiful places on earth. Join me, Randy Cantrell, and my co-host, Dennis Simpson, as we engage in weekly conversations to explore Hot Springs Village Inside Out. Today's show is brought to you by Central Arkansas's favorite radio station, KVRE. Find them on the dial at 92.9 FM. Stream them live at kvre.com. RE/MAX of Hot Springs Village, the award-winning RE/MAX of Hot Springs Village, is the largest real estate office inside the village with over 30 full-time agents and support staff. Visit them to learn more about this beautiful place to solve your real estate needs. Call them today at 1-800-364-9007 or find them online at explorehsv.com. They are RE/MAX of Hot Springs Village at 1-800-364-9007 or online at explorehsv.com.
The day of the bombing, after I found out my grandchildren had been killed, we went home and I turned on the TV and I was watching the TV. And one of the surviving children's parents was there in the hospital room with him. And he was giving testimony. He said, "You know, this is so wonderful. I just prayed and asked God for a little boy to hold him. God answered my prayer and here's my boy." Wow. How do you think my family felt? We prayed and asked God for a little boy to hold. And we lost both of them.
And that is how we start this episode. I'm Dennis Simpson. He's Randy Cantrell. And we have Miss Kathy Sanders. Kathy, it has been months we've been trying to book you on this show. You are an author. You are a well-known personality on television and radio. You have told a story repeatedly, and the story is not what we might make it sound like right then. It's not about death and disaster. It's actually about forgiveness.
That's right.
And I can't wait to hear the rest of the story. Set us up, start us. How did it go? What happened?
Well, first of all, let me give you a little bit of background. My daughter was a young mother, 23 years old. She lived at home with her children. My grandchildren were more than grandchildren. They had the bedroom next to mine. We co-parented those children. And Edie and I worked together downtown, and we dropped the kids off at the daycare. Edie had stayed home on Monday and Tuesday before the bombing on Wednesday. And she had been sick, and she had kept the boys home with her, so she got to spend those 2 days with them. But she was going to stay home on Wednesday as well. But on Tuesday night, she got a call from a coworker that said, "Oh, Edie, you've got to come to work tomorrow. We're having the office birthday party for the people that had their birthday in the month of April." And it was Edie and one other person. And she said, "I baked you a cake. You've got to come to work." So we dropped the boys off that morning and went on to our office. I'll never forget that morning. I'll never forget that morning. They sat at the counter in the kitchen and they ate their little breakfast. And I'll never forget it. But
Now, they were how old, Kathy?
they were 2 and 3 years old. Chase was about 3 weeks from his 4th birthday.
And this was Oklahoma City, Oklahoma.
That's right, the Oklahoma City bombing. And we dropped the kids off. We went on to our office. I'm on the 5th floor, Edie's on the 3rd. I'm sitting there and I hear this horrific roar and the building shook. I had no idea what it was, but I knew that it was really bad. Whatever it was bad. I grabbed my purse and I ran down 2 flights of stairs to my daughter's office. And when I opened the door, people were all lined up and they were looking out the windows trying to figure out what happened. Someone hung up the phone and made the announcement, "Hey, they just blew up the bank building." And I said, "Edie, let's go see." So we ran down 3 more flights of stairs and we went out the front doors of our building. And we were 3 blocks from the MURA. And when we went outside, there were big sheets of plate glass falling down all around us. There was not one car moving in the street. Edie looked up the street to where the bank was, and the bank was intact. So she turned and was going to run and go back inside the building where it was safe. And as she goes and we're starting to go back inside, I look up the street and I said, Edie, I saw the smoke rising from the Murrah, and I said, Edie, the babies. We take off running as fast as we can. And when we get to the south side of the Murrah building, I'm saying, Edie, wait up, wait up. And we stop and we're kind of surveying the damage. The building was intact on the south side. The windows were blown out and the blinds were kind of flapping in the wind, but the building was intact. And as we're standing there trying to figure out what happened and we're trying to catch our breath, we hear boom, 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 and we see this new cloud of black billowing smoke. We take off running to the north side of the building. And when we get to the north side of the building and we turn, where the daycare once was nothing but a pancake pile of rubble. My daughter fell to her knees and said, my babies, my babies. And it was the first time in my daughter's life that she had a problem that her mother wasn't going to be able to fix. I turned, we didn't have enough sense to go back to the south side of the building and get in that stairwell and go up. We were trying to climb the rubble on the north side of the building because that's where the kids were. We had just dropped them off there, less than an hour ago. So I'll never forget, it was a jacketed ATF agent that stopped us. And I'm thinking, ATF, who is that? And does he have the authority to keep me out of this building? And then the second bomb threat came. That morning, there was a training device that was in the basement of the building that had been used by the ATF that had fallen the 9 floors into the basement. And when it was discovered, they thought it was a real bomb. So everybody's yelling, get back, get back, get back. And they stampede away from the building. Well, we didn't want to leave. We want to find their children. We're trying to find it, and we were physically forced to leave. And so as we left the building, we were told, go to the children's hospital. That's where the children will be taken when they're removed from the building. We went to the hospital and we began to wait. My son was an off-duty police officer, and he had seen his mother and his sister on the news coverage. He was watching the news coverage of the bombing, and he knew something was bad. And he came down and said, Mama, don't worry, I'm going to find the boys. And so he left. And when he came back, I'm sitting in the emergency room. He goes, Mama, was Colton wearing little green shorts and little white shirt? I said, yes, son, yes, that's Colton. And I could tell by his countenance that something was horribly wrong. And I said, what is it, son? What is it? I said, is the baby gone? Is the baby gone? And he said, yeah, Mama, Colton's gone. He held me for a few minutes, and then he set me in a chair and he said, Mama, where is Edie? I've got to tell her. I said, son, she's around in the chaplain's office. And in a few minutes, I heard a blood-curdling scream, and I knew my son had found my daughter. And that's, he left again that day, and he said, Mama, I'm going to go find Chase, my oldest grandson. And he did find Chase. He found him toe-tagged in the back of a refrigerated truck being used for a makeshift morgue. We found out later from the rescue worker went in to try to find someone that he could save in the rubble, and he found my youngest grandson in the rubble. He dug him out and he was holding him. He said he was going to apply CPR, try to do something to help him, but he realized he had been gutted by a blast shard and he died in his arms. So when the second bomb threat came, he left him on a bench by the side of the rubble and covered him with a sheet, and that's where my son found him.
At this point, this sounds like, it really does. It sounds like a movie. It sounds like it's written to be as tragic as could possibly happen. And it is. I mean, it's not written that way, but oh my goodness, Kathy, what, I know you're a woman of faith. What do you say? What do you think? What do you do?
Well, I didn't know what to do. You know, I grew up in a Christian home, and I'm Christian. Uh, but I have to tell you, my value system was shaken when I turned on the TV and I saw that the man holding his son, and he said, I prayed and asked God for a boy to hold, and here's my son. He answered my prayer, and I'm thinking, God, why didn't you answer my prayer? I watched my husband become so angry over the bombing. He was angry at the federal government because he didn't believe we were being given the truth about the bombing. We believed there were other people involved. He was mad at Timothy McVeigh for blowing up the building, and he was mad at God because he didn't answer our prayer. It was the first time in my life I ever considered suicide. And I thought, you know, I don't know how I'm going to live in a world filled with this much pain. I just want to die. But I knew I couldn't do that to my daughter and to my husband. And I prayed and I said, God, you know, you're going to have to help me. I can't go there. If you're out there, Lord, help me. I need your help. And I began to trust God. I went to him in prayer. It was a rough time, though, Dennis. It was a really rough time. We investigated the bombing. You know, shortly after the bombing, it's the largest manhunt in American history is going on for John Doe number 2. And within a few days, the FBI calls off the manhunt and said, you know what? It was all a mistake. There was no John Doe number 2. Well, there were 22 eyewitnesses that saw John Doe number 2 downtown the morning of the bombing, and not one eyewitness saw him alone. That concerned us.
Sure.
We had a dinner at our home for the surviving children, or for the parents of the children that were killed in the daycare. I'm sorry. And it was 19 families that had lost their children. I mean, it was the saddest of times. And one of the young mothers at this dinner was telling us, you know, when I dropped my son off that morning, she saw the bomb squad downtown. It's like, how do you know? How do you know it was the bomb squad? And she said they had big blue letters on their jacket. Well, the next morning, my husband went down to the fire station and he asked the fire chief, did you all have prior warning? Was there a bomb squad downtown before the bomb went off? The fire chief said, oh, absolutely not. We did not. Then we found an article in the paper, from a paper called the Panola Watchman. Someone did an interview with this office full of people that was in the federal building at the post office across the street from the federal building, and they were watching in the alleyway, and they said, wonder what the bomb squad's doing down here. The joke of the office was, well, I don't know, I guess we'll find out soon enough, meaning when the bomb went off, just being trite. And they did find out. So when they were presented with the information, hey, this whole office full of people have been watching the bomb squad downtown. What's the deal? Well, the chief then calls a press conference and he makes the announcement, you know what, I made a mistake. Our bomb squad was downtown the morning of the bombing, but it was just our guys running routine errands and they stopped to get a cup of coffee. But they were not only pulling having the bomb disposal unit truck there, they had the trailer with the bomb disposal unit on the back. There were reports of bomb sniffing dogs downtown. This stuff, it was killing my husband because he just no faith in the government. He had no faith in God at that time. But I knew if I was going to make it, I was going to have to trust God. But I began to investigate with my husband just as kind of something to do. And we thought, well, you know what? If you want to point the finger at someone else, about Stephen Jones, Timothy McVeigh's attorney, if you want to point the finger at someone else, we'll help you. Because we knew there were other people involved. And when I did that, I began to get all sorts of documents that McVeigh's investigators would turn over things to me. I got McVeigh's telephone records, He called a place called Elohim City the week before the bombing, 2 minutes after calling the Ryder Truck Rental Company. And that was at Elohim City. Now, you would think that that would be an important phone call. The FBI would want to know who McVeigh was calling, what the call was about. They interviewed thousands of people in regard to Timothy McVeigh, including his third-grade school teacher, but they didn't interview Andreas Strassmeyer, the man McVeigh was calling there. This stuff just added fuel to the fire, so to speak. I could keep going all day about the inconsistencies and why we began to investigate.
Now, if I can, well, what's the name of your book again?
Now You See Me is the first book I wrote.
And I'm sorry, say that one more time. You broke up on just a little.
Now You See Me. It was the first book Now You See Me is the second book I wrote, my latest book. But my first book was After Oklahoma City, and it contained all these questions that we had. And 2020, Dateline, some of the best journalists in America took our work very seriously, and they ran stories based on what we were doing.
Unbelievable. Now, let me, and for those that are listening, let's just, from a high 5 mile view real quick. The stages of grief typically are shock, anger, denial, usually bargaining, and then acceptance. So it's shock, anger, denial, acceptance. I can't imagine, and for those of you that are listening, and I hope you're getting something from this, the shock, it can be big, it can be little, and it doesn't matter. You say, well, I got laid off, it's still a shock, it's whatever. Maybe it's not your grandchildren perishing in a terrible bombing, but it's the same structure, it's the same organization. How long is not even a fair question. Did you feel yourself going between those stages, the shock, the anger, the denial, the acceptance? Did you, there wasn't anybody waving a flag going, okay, today it's time to be angry?
No, grief is a long process. I kind of best describe it. Do you think if you lost your eyesight today, would there ever be a day that you'd wake up in the morning and you wouldn't mourn the fact you couldn't see the beautiful sun rising? You would. You're left with this new life that you hadn't chosen and that you didn't want. But there were still plenty of good things to live for, just like for a blind person. And that's the best way I know how to describe it. But it did concern me that there were so many unanswered questions. And within a year, and like I said, we were on Dateline, 2020, hard copy, that we had newspapers from around the world, even the New York Times and the BBC, they were coming to us and running these stories. My husband was so angry, he was 47 years old, that one day he came in and he had been sick. He'd been popping Tums and stuff, just an upset stomach. And he came in and I could tell something's wrong. I said, what's wrong? And he goes, well, I have blood in my urine. Well, we took him to the doctor, and the doctor looked at him and he said, how long has he been yellow? I didn't even notice that he was yellow. His eyes were yellow. We went to sleep every night crying. I didn't notice the yellow eyes. It wound up that he had pancreatic cancer. And I spent the next year taking care of him. And he died less than 2 years after the bombing. And I know it was the stress, the anger and the hate that he harbored in his heart. You know, harboring bitterness and anger in your heart is like drinking poison and expecting the enemy to die. You know, it killed him as far as I'm concerned. And it got him, the death certificate says pancreatic cancer, but I'm not so sure he would have had that if he hadn't been so angry and hateful for so long.
Kathy, was seeing what that did to him, was that some impetus for you to try to figure out a way to turn a page, to write a new chapter, to try to forgive?
No, uh, I never was as angry as he was. I was too devastated. I was too hurt. I, uh, but I did reach out to God and I said, God, you're going to have to help me. And shortly after he died, uh, I moved to Denver to attend Terry Nichols' trial. I didn't get to attend Tim McVeigh's trial because my husband was dying during that time, but I still wanted these questions. I still continue to investigate because I thought I owed it to Chase and Colton and Glenn because I felt like this bombing took all their lives. So the turning point, Randy, came when I went to the trial and the judge called a recess and I went out in the hall and I saw a little lady in the hallway with a long dark coat on, elderly woman with a kind of her hair. She looked like the Aunt Bee persona off of the Andy Griffith show. And I could tell people were talking about her, but not to her. And then it dawned on me, oh my God, that's Terry Nichols' mother. And I thought, God, I wonder how she must feel. So I went over to her and I began to introduce myself. And she said, she began to cry and she said, I know who you are. I've seen you on TV. And I put my arms around her and I said, I just want you to know how sorry I am for your family. And we had an instant connection. And after 2020 did this show that we helped them with about pointing the finger at others, what the bomb squad's doing down there, and who was McVeigh calling at Elohim City. Some of the family members were band together with the local news, and they were mad because they thought we were going to get McVeigh and Nichols off, and that it was really ugly. They were really mad. So when I went to the trial, I kind of felt like a pariah. And maybe I was just projecting what they thought of me, but it's like I didn't feel welcome. I was just nervous to be around them because I see them on TV and I knew how mad they were. So Terry's mother, Joyce, and I had a bond. So I began to sit with her. So I was sitting with Terry Nichols' family instead of the families of those that were killed. We began to eat lunch together. And it wasn't long before Terry Nichols, the bomber, became my friend Joyce's son. He was kind of changing for me. Toward the end of the trial, I told Joyce and Terry's sister, Susie, I said, you know, if Terry wants to save himself, he needs to testify. And they told Terry that. Oh, and during this time, I'm sitting with his mother. After several days, there was a period of time went by. Terry and our eyes met. And that hadn't happened because at McVeigh's trials and hearings that I got to go to, he was so cocky. When he had entered the room, his team would pat him on the back and treat him like a movie star. Terry Nichols, he never looked up. He stayed down. He was very modest. He was very, I think, ashamed. He was a humble man. So in the courtroom one day, our eyes met. And I'm looking at him in the eye, and he's looking at me. I'm sitting next to his mother. I didn't know what to do. So I mouthed, "Hi, Candy." And he looked at me and he said, "Hi." And that was a beginning. Every day after that, we would, sometime during the course of the day, we would acknowledge each other with a nod, just a nod. So toward the end of the trial, I'm telling his mother and sister he needs to testify if he wants to save himself. And they came back and told me, well, Terry said that his lawyers wouldn't let him testify. But he told them, you have her write down her questions and I'll answer all the questions that she has. And by this time, Joyce and Susie are my friends, and they're telling me that. Susie's telling me that, and I'm saying, Susie, don't ever have your brother write anything down. You know, which astonished even me. I didn't know why I did that. So at the end of the trial, the jury couldn't come to a decision because they wanted to know. They knew Terry Nichols was guilty, but they didn't know how guilty. They wanted to know who the men were that were seen with McVeigh and Nichols out at Gary Lake, where they built the bomb. The defense and the prosecution, they agreed that the bomb was built at Gary Lake. There were witnesses that saw the bomb built there. They wanted to know who were the men seen that were coming and going from Timothy McVeigh's room at the Dreamland, because McVeigh drove the bomb truck from the Dreamland straight to the Alpha P. Murrah building. The Chinese delivery guy said he gave the Chinese food to some men that wasn't McVeigh, and there were other men in the room. The lady that owned the motel said there were other people coming and going from there, even the maid. So the jury was conflicted on the sentencing phase, and they didn't know what they were going to do. And Michael Tiger, who was Terry's attorney, he summons me. He sends someone to find me, takes me up the back stairs of the courthouse, and invites me to come in. I go into this room, and there's the whole defense team sitting around this big conference table. And it was nice that they brought me in the back way so the families don't have to see me going up there. I mean, that would have really been the kiss of death. So I'm up there, and Michael's saying, I suppose you wonder why I invited you there. And I said, yeah, I do. And he goes, well, we're at the sentencing phase. And he goes, I want to ask you, would you be willing to ask the court to spare Nichols's life? And I began to cry, and I said, you know, I lost my children, my grandchildren. I lost my husband. These people already hate me, and now you want me to get up on the stand and ask to spare his life? And he said, yeah. And I'm thinking, well, who knows more about the bombing than the bomber? And I looked at Mr. Tiger and I said, sir, you get me in to see Terry Nichols and have him answer my questions, and I'll do it. And he said, okay, I'll have it done. I'll do it. He leaves, and then I don't remember if it was a few hours later or the next morning, the judge declared the jury hung because they couldn't make a decision. Well, once he declared the jury hung, the death sentence was off the table for Terry Nichols. So the lawyer didn't need me anymore. So I never got that meeting with Terry Nichols. So the trial was over. I went back home. I'm home for a few days. I go to my mailbox and pull out my mail, and there is a letter. I see the return address is Terry Nichols. And now he's at the county jail in Oklahoma City, because since the feds didn't execute him, Oklahoma had a backup plan, and they brought him back to stand trial, because Nichols and McVeigh were only charged with the death of, I believe it was 8 federal agents. The other 163 people, they weren't charged any for their deaths. It was a federal trial against those federal agents. So Oklahoma brought him back to charge him with the murders of the 165 other people. So there I see Terry Nichols, county jail, and I'm thinking, oh God, I wonder what he wants. And I'm thinking, I'm not looking for a pen pal. And if I was, it wouldn't be the Oklahoma City bomber. And then I thought about that. And I thought, well, who knows more about the bombing than Terry Nichols? And at that point in my life, Dennis, I was willing to dance with the devil to get to the truth.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Say that again. You were what?
At that point in my life, I was willing to dance with the devil to get to the truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I answered Terry's letter, and he was thanking me for befriending his family and how much it meant to his mother and his sister. That began a correspondence. And after several letters, he said, if you'll send me your phone number, I'll call you. So I sent him my phone number, and he called me. And it was the oddest thing. That's back when we used to have those little caller ID things attached to our phone, you know. I'm waiting for that call for several days, and then I see it's the county jail. And it was so strange because before I picked up the phone, I'm going, hello, hello, trying to check my voice like you do if you're going to answer the phone and you're sleepy, but you don't want to sound sleepy. So you kind of clear it up. I'm going, hello, hello. And then it's a taped recording that said, you have an incoming call from, and then it was Terry's voice. Well, Terry and I began to talk on the phone, and he began to call me quite a bit, a lot during that time. And then one day he said, well, if I talk to my lawyer, would you come see me? And I said, yeah, I'd like that. Yeah, I'll do that. And so he gets back with me. Well, my lawyer wants to talk to you. I said, okay. So I call his lawyer, and he said, well, I just want to know why. Why do you want to talk to Terry Nichols? And I said, well, I had several reasons. I said, one of the things, I became friends with his mom and his sister at the trial. And Terry Nichols Balmer became my friend Joyce's son. And now I've communicated with him a lot. And I think I'm getting to know I think I knew Terry Nichols as well as just about anybody, I'd say. And we didn't talk about the bombing. We talked around the bombing. And he said, well, as long as you don't ask him any questions about the bombing, that you can go. I'll take you to see him. Well, when I married my husband, Glenn, I had kept my father's name, my maiden name. And so I was very happy that when I went in to sign in with Terry's lawyer, that my name was Kathy Graham, because I didn't want it to be a media event. I didn't want people to know that I was up there visiting. So I visited with him several times. And he told me, he said, Kathy, when I'm no longer under the threat of the death penalty, I'm going to tell you everything. And during the course of this time, Timothy McVeigh was executed. That was 4 years after the bombing. And Terry Nichols' ex-wife, Lana Padilla, the mother of Terry's son, Josh, who the FBI thought was John Doe number 2 for a while. He was a great big 12-year-old. So I hadn't seen him since the trial. It had been 4 years. But Lana called me and she said, you know, we're coming to Oklahoma City. Josh hadn't seen his dad in 4 years and he's having a lot of trouble. And I said, well, Lana, why, you can stay with me. Why don't you come to my home? And she goes, oh, I don't know that Josh would feel comfortable doing that. And I said, well, just come on by, have dinner. And if he's not, I certainly understand. So that evening, there comes a knock on the door, and I go to the door and I answer it. And there's Lana Padilla, and there's Josh. But instead of being a chubby, shorter version of this 12-year-old, he's a tall, big, good-looking kid. I look up at him because he's taller than me, and I, what do you say? I said, well, I knew you were coming, so I baked a cake. And he laughed. We had dinner. We stayed up into the wee hours of the night, and Josh told me how at school the kids had nicknamed him Bomber and how he would get randomly beat up. And he was just having all sorts of trouble, and he dropped out of school. They wound up staying with me for 4 days. I never told my neighbors. I didn't tell my family that Terry Nichols' son and his ex-wife were at my house. How could I expect anyone to understand what I didn't really understand myself? And I didn't leave the house because I didn't want to be seen out with them. And they probably just thought I was being gracious, and I was gracious, but that wasn't the reason that I didn't leave the house. And so um, they stayed 4 days, and on the last day, Lana and Josh are beginning to leave, and they're getting in the car, and Josh looks at me, and he's got tears in his eyes, and he jumps out of the car, and he grabs me, and oh, I'm sorry, I'm ahead of myself. I'm going to back up a bit on this. Can you edit it?
No, just go ahead. Go ahead. No, you're fine.
Okay. So they wound up staying 4 days with me. And on the last day, Josh said, "Will you take me to the Oklahoma City Memorial?" And I thought, oh, Lord, I don't want him to see me. But how could I tell Josh no? Not after what he had been through. And so I took him to the memorial, and nobody recognized us. Josh didn't even look like Josh anymore. He'd grown up some. But I'll tell you, when I stood at the chairs, number 51 and number 52, with my arm around the bomber's son, I knew God had done a work in my life. And then later that day, when Josh got ready to leave, he goes to get in the car, and he jumps back out, and he puts his arms around me, and he says, "You are the nicest lady I ever met." And Lana gets out of the car, and we're doing a group hug, and she said, "Kathy, thank you for giving Josh some good memories of Oklahoma." She said, "Last time we were here, we were booed and heckled." And I knew I was doing something really right. And I came to the place in my life. It was a process. Forgiveness for me was a process. You don't just, it's kind of like learning to be blind. It's a process to learn to cope through that world. And I've been going through it for a long time. And I knew something had changed when I had my arm around Josh Nichols at Chase and Colton's chair. And
so there wasn't a day when you went, okay, I'm not mad about this anymore.
You can't flip the switch. For me, I didn't flip the switch. It was a process, turning over myself. God help me. You're going to have to help me. This was another pivotal time in my life. And this was a few years even after my meeting with Josh. I remember laying in my bed, and I was looking toward the ceiling, and I was praying. And I said, "God, I've read my Bible. And the Lord's Prayer says, 'Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us.'" And I said, "God, I don't know how to do that. You're going to have to help me. Would you please send your Holy Spirit to intercede for me?" And I will tell you, when I began to pray for Terry Nichols and Timothy McVeigh, it began to change my life. And I don't know what it did for them, if it did anything.
So let's recap. The forgiveness is not for them. It's for you.
It's the biggest gift you can give yourself. That's right.
Randy?
Well, I'm thinking, Kathy, I do a little bit of preaching, and I crafted a sermon some years ago on forgiveness. And I remember in that sermon using the story of Bud Welch.
Mm-hmm.
And Bud Welch had a 23-year-old daughter named Julie Marie, who was killed in the bomb.
Yeah, I know Bud.
And I had read his story, and about him just desperately wanting this death penalty. And like you, he encountered the family. Now, this was Tim McVeigh's, as I remember, it was Tim McVeigh's father and brother and sister.
I had
went to Buffalo. Anyway, it was like your story, a powerful story, and like your story. But I suspect there's so many that don't go this way. A man who went from clamoring for the death penalty to finding forgiveness and realizing it's the only path forward, and realizing here's a family that's equally damaged, different,
Yes.
different for sure. To people that are struggling, and I'm sure you've had countless of these conversations, to people that are struggling with forgiveness for whatever, and so many of us harbor bitterness and hatred for things much, much more trivial than what you've endured. You say what?
Well, that forgiveness is a process. Lord, I don't know how to pray. You're going to have to help me. Send your Holy Spirit to intercede for me. Just what I've told you. I don't think there's a magic wand that you can wave, and healing is a process. I can remember after the bombing, I cried so much that if you found a few hours where you weren't crying, you were thinking, oh God, it's over. I'm going to be okay now. And then it would just flood over you again. It did for weeks and months. What I want to tell people, though, it's a process. Turn your heart toward God and ask Him to help you with it. And He understands. God understands. I think God understood Glenn's the hatred that he harbored in his heart. My son that found the boys after he read my book, Now You See Me, he said, Mom, it's a great book. And I'm really glad that you were able to forgive, but please don't ever ask me to do that. Yeah. And I think God understands that too.
Well, and that proves how personal it is. I remember in Bud's story, and you'll know factually if I've got this right or not, but at the end of their visit, so they go to Buffalo and they see Tim McVeigh's father and sister, and it dawns on Bud, his daughter's name was Julie, it dawns on him that he can get on a stage, he can get on a platform, and he can talk in glowing terms about his daughter. And he made the comment, but Tim McVeigh's dad won't ever tell people I had a son.
Yeah.
And man, that, it's like, oh, there's a shot to the heart. How did your daughter cope?
Well, she's, when people say, how are you doing? That we should quit asking that question. I have a whole list of things don't do after somebody's died, because when you say, they come to you after you buried the children, well, how are you doing? Well, I'm doing horrible. Is that what you want to hear? You always have to just kind of suck it up. So the other thing I hated was when people would come and say, well, at least you've got your memories. I wanted to say, I don't care.
Right.
I don't want memories. I wanted my grandchildren. Or God, I don't know what this one means. God only takes the best. When someone loses somebody, and don't try to fix it with your words. And I was guilty of that before this happened to me, because you think you can say things to make them feel better. But when your heart has been removed and put back in your chest, you can't say anything to fix it. What you need to say is, put your arms around and say, I love you and I'm here for you. And you can't possibly understand how I feel. Yeah, the only one in this world that could have understood how I felt was Janie Coverdale. And she lost both of her grandchildren in the bombing as well. And she was the only friend I had during that time that I could go to lunch with. And we would talk about our grandchildren in the past tense. And yeah. Jason Colton and Aaron and Elijah are buried across from each other in the cemetery. And Janie died just a few months ago, and now she's out there with them.
Well, I had mentioned earlier, and I know Randy and I both, we consult with people. We talk to people. We try and comfort people. And when I tell the story about shock, anger, denial, acceptance, and that's, it's in this community, it's rote. You've heard it a billion times. You can quote it backwards. Yeah. What people don't say is that those, number one, they don't always happen in that order. Number two, you don't move out of shock and into anger and say, oh, I'm never going to go back into shock. No, you will be back and forth between anger and shock and denial and acceptance, and then right back to shock again. And they're all interconnected so closely. It's not a linear process in any way. Is that fair?
Yes, and I think we all handle things differently.
That's
I'm
right.
not going to handle it the same way that you do. We all handle it different. But I can tell you that had I not learned to forgive, I I would have probably gone to my grave with the bitterness and anger. Learning to forgive changed my life. I never thought about speaking to groups of people. I never thought about writing books or doing shows like this. But learning to forgive changed my life, and it changed my story.
Did it make you a new person? Whether you wanted to or not?
It made me a different person. I, I'm a I think I'm a deeper person. People who haven't suffered are blessed. They're blessed, but they don't understand is I think I'm more compassionate. I like for instance, used to I would see, let's say, a plane crash on TV. They're covering that, or even the Ukraine war. You would see some coverage and you'd think, oh, gee, that's too bad. But as I watched the Ukraine being bombed and the people and they're running from their homes, uh, I have an empathy for them that I never would have had I not been in a bombing and seen the bloody people running from the building and uh, watched the turmoil. But at least I could go home and get in my own bed. The Ukraine has really been heavy on my heart. We all have our stories and we all have needs, and it's made me much more compassionate.
Let me shift gears, Kathy. How did you end up in the village?
Well, 7 years after my husband Glenn died, I met and married Tom Sanders, and he lived in Little Rock, Arkansas. And we've been married over 20 years now, and we moved to Little Rock. And uh, my husband is 82 years old. He is still working, drives to work every single day in Little Rock. Uh, and I figured out, you're not ever going to retire. And he goes, no, I like working. I said, well, I'm retiring. So I said, let's move to the village. And I spent a couple of years looking for a home that fit our needs, and we moved here. And he almost thanks me daily that he said,
How long ago was that you moved there?
6.5 years. 6.5 years. And I tell people, I'm living in heaven on my way to heaven. I love the village. I love the people. This is my home.
Yeah, it's I won't go into it because I never have, and I probably never will. I didn't suffer anything near what you did, but was going through a bit of a rough patch. Came over in 2018 because I just wanted to get in some woods and walk some trails and be in seclusion, and that's how I fell in love with the place. For me, does this resonate for you? It's there's something very cathartic about the whole place for me. Is there for you?
Yeah, there is. I mean, I'm serious when I say I feel like I'm living in heaven on my way to heaven. I am so blessed. And, I've had a lot of tragedy in my life. Just a couple of years before the bombing, I called my dad to see if he could fix my car. And he said, yeah, honey, bring it on over. And when I got there, I found him dead in the floor of a massive heart attack. 2 years later, my mother strangled in a horrible accident. I lost my grandchildren, then I lost my husband. But I'm sitting here today. I'm so blessed. I'm so blessed to be in the village. I have a love and compassion for people. I want to help people. I want them to know, hey, bad things happen, but you've still got a life. I want to tell them, you're down and you're hurt and you're broken, but you will survive. There's life after this. And I've got a song in my heart and a smile on my face today, and I love it here.
Well, there's the mic drop. There's the mic drop moment right there.
That is a mic drop moment right there. I should have shut up and we should have stopped recording right there. I was going to say I lived in Walton Heights over on 430 where you could look out over the river.
Yes. Had
a stunning view. You could see 30 miles. You could see over to the armory and whatever. And I would come out here this is the early 2000s. I would come out here and take pictures. And I remember driving home and looking in the windows of people's houses that were watching TV or whatever. And I remember thinking, they get to stay here all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, I can't get here quick enough. I cannot get here quick enough.
Yeah. We used to travel quite a bit. And then the pandemic came and we quit traveling. And it's like, I tell my husband, where would I want to go that's any better than this? I mean, I wake up, I look at the lake. I love it here. I tell, we've got 1.5 million frequent flyer miles, and I don't want to go anywhere.
I don't have any frequent flyer miles, and if I were there, I wouldn't want to go anywhere either.
No, I don't want to go anywhere. I love it here.
Well, Kathy, I tell you what, I think we're going to have to come back and visit you again and ask you about tacos and burgers or pizza in a next episode. But for joining us for today, Hot Springs Village Inside Out, I'm Dennis Simpson. She's Kathy Sanders, author and speaker, and he's Randy Cantrell. And we will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Hot Springs Village Inside Out, a podcast where Hot Springs Village, Arkansas is the star. Please subscribe to the podcast. You can do that by visiting our website, hsvinsideout.com, and tell a friend.